Kumusta sa inyong lahat? Ang nais kong sabihin ay ang aking, hangarin ay na ipahayag sa inyo ang lahat na aking, um, kinakailangang sabihin at ikuwento sa inyo sa Tagalog, ngunit talagang hindi ko kaya. Ako'y nag-aaral ng Tagalog ngayon, ngunit hindi ko pa kaya na magsalita ng maigi. Kaya ipagpaumanhin na lamang sapagkat kailangan kong magsalita ng Ingles at pwede ring Espanyol at ihahalo ko rin ang Tagalog. Subalit, eh, mm, ayaw kong magsalita ng Tagalog na halo ng Ingles. Kasi para sa akin, ang magsalita ng Taglish ay kulang ng paggalang sa ating sariling wika. Ang Ingles ay magaling na wika. Mahal ko rin ang Ingles. Ngunit ang mensahe ng aking mga pahayag ay ang malalim na hangarin kong bumalik sa aking mga ugat, kulturang ugat, na hindi nila binigay sa akin nung ako'y musmos. At salamat kay Rizal, kay Don Pedro Serrano, para bang talagang meron akong malakas na necesidad de recuperar, no? Kailangan kong naintindihan ninyo, di ba? Para bang ang Pilipino ay naging ulila ng lahat, halos lahat. May nangyari sa ating talagang malaking sakunan, malaking aksidente ng historya, at may naputol doon, naputol. At may bagong puno na lumaki. Ngunit ang kanyang ugat ay mababaw, hindi malalim. At ito ay nararamdaman natin. Siyempre, pero hindi natin siya binibigyan ng salita. Para bang bahagi lang ng ating buhay, ng ating pagkatao. Ngunit meron ding mas malalim na tumatawag sa atin. Ang ating mga ninuno na hindi marunong mag-Ingles. Pero narunong silang mag-Espanyol, mag-Kastila. Ngayon hindi na ako pwedeng kailangan kong magpalit ng wika. ipagpaumanhin lamang. Um, yes, what's the difference between Taglish and Tagalog mixed with Spanish? Well, you see, Tagalog met Spanish. When was it? 400 years ago. And Tagalog agreed to receive Spanish because of the historical problems that the inhabitants of our archipelago were having, serious problems, mainly Visayas and Luzon. And so Spain came to our islands not as a conqueror, but mainly as an offerer of advantages. And our forefathers agreed. There was a basic agreement, and there was a marriage. There was a marriage. Sure, there were always problems, but it was not, strictly speaking, a bloody, long-winded conquest. No, it was a pact. And so Tagalog, which is the most developed language, as far as I have read, it was the most developed language of all our languages. And during the Spanish period, it became very greatly studied, also the other languages, and mainly by the friars. And why by the friars? Why by the religious? Kasi wala silang ibang ginagawa. They had the time, they had the energy to devote themselves to study, and not all of them. Yes, just a very few, and many of them Jesuits. So at the same time, they were learning our languages. And then when the 18th and 19th century came along, commercial activity kept intensifying, and a lot of foreigners were coming to the islands. And so it was important for them, and this I learned here, it was important for them to pick up the Tagalog especially quickly. And so this was an incentive also for many studies of Tagalog to come out, and grammars, yes. And as we will see, Don Pedro Serrano's father was a lexicographer, a writer of dictionaries, and his son took after him. I have covered this because I use it so much that the friction is starting to hurt the leather binding. So, but anyway, I found a nice paper to cover it with. Yeah. So so you see, Tagalog and Spanish were married. But Tagalog and English, that was not what you would call a marriage, or at least it was a forced marriage. Yes, because the Americans, mga Amerikano, sinabi nila sa mga Pilipino, sinabi rin nila ito sa mga Cubano, na wala kaming problema, si gusto ninyong patuluyan ang digmaan, problema ninyo. And so, as in the Cuban case, in the Philippine case, we opted for surrender. And even Macario Sakay, the last Supremo of the Katipunan, agreed, was finally persuaded to surrender. And well, so Tagalog was given in marriage to English. But what happens when you have a dominant linguistic entity that comes in? Of course, English had to be the dominant party here. And so Tagalog lost a lot of its richness because it began to adopt the extranjerismos. It began to adopt the English words. And Tagalog, Filipinos, we are so incredible. And this I have also noticed here. The Diccionario Serrano Laktaw tells you the incredible quality that we have of flexibility, of the ability to take in the new, of adaptation. We are really amazingly able to change. In fact, Tagalog, one of its big characteristics is that it is full of transformisms. And I dare say that it's even more transformism-oriented than English. But in Tagalog, nouns become verbs and verbs become nouns, and all you have to do is add suffixes or prefixes, and you can express so much. But what happened when Spanish was progressively eliminated was that English took its place, and English kind of took over. And even though at first the Filipinos hated the presence of the Americans, the new generations, of course, learned to love the English language. Because, you know, children are completely open. And besides this, the United States did a really good job, because English is also a very seductive language. Look at how it has seduced the whole planet. But whatever happened, it's important to know that today, Western civilization is being destructured. I mean, it is going through a huge decline. And what happens when the what was up to now the reigning power goes into decline? Well, the barbarians have to start. Well, we don't have to. We can start to shift our vision. And in this case, at least it happened to me, because I was the most pro-American person on the planet, American culture. Yeah, not politics, not culture, English. Well, I come to a continent where anti-Americanism is received in the mother's milk. And I didn't even understand why there was so much hatred for the United States. But of course, now I understand much better how that works. Basically, it's when you see this foreign culture as still invasive, whereas in our case, we went through 100 years of seduction. It wasn't just seduction, it was like, I mean, it was an incredible re-engineering, and it was based on education. Education, the most powerful tool, which is why Rizal always said, education is what we need. And I respectfully echo that. And today we can be trilingual, quadrilingual, whatever, how many languages we want to learn, but it's very important to return to our roots. And our roots have to do with the pamana of Don Pedro Serrano Laktaw. So I prepared a PowerPoint because it's good to know who was he, to frame, right? Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the dictionary. And these are the two images that I have seen on internet of Gat Pedro. I learned that Gat means Señor, or Don in Spanish. Here we see a picture of him as a young man and as an old man. And I don't know why, but the picture of him as an old man gives me the impression that he went blind when he was old. Anyway, he was born in Kupang, Bulacan, October 24, 1853, and died on September 22, 1928. Buried in Mandaluyong, Rizal, which the old name of Rizal was Morong. His father was a writer of dictionaries, Don Rosalio Serrano, that's a typo, and his mother was Juana Laktaw. They had 13 children, and so Doña Juana was very busy, but she taught Pedro much about literature, and it seems Tagalog literature. So these were the two works that are mentioned on internet that Don Rosalio wrote. Excuse me. Diccionario de Términos Comunes Tagalog-Castellano, 1854, and Nuevo Diccionario Manual Español-Tagalog in 1872. Of course. Now, to get itchy throat. Kumakating lalamunan. A ver. So he was a trained teacher. He began to teach in Pampanga and studied the folklore. And his book was incorporated by Isabelo de los Reyes in El Folklore Filipino, exhibited in the Exposición Filipina in Madrid in 1887. And he had an important friendship with Marcelo del Pilar. He met del Pilar when he was teaching Pampanga, and he subordinated his work to denounce the abuses of the friar orders and del Pilar's campaigning for representation in the Cortes, which Puerto Rico and Cuba already had received. A detail that is not mentioned in our history classes. And here it says that together with Marcelo del Pilar, Mariano Ponce, Pedro Serrano, and Mariano Crisostoman, Jose Gatmaitan, Pedro Serrano formed a benevolent entity called Caja de Jesus Maria Jose, to award scholarships to poor children. And so you can tell that from his youth, he was already a person with much social consciousness and concern for social progress. And he helped to finance La Solidaridad after Del Pilar had left Manila to be an exile in Barcelona. He was friends with Rizal, and he was helping Rizal to bring Noli Me Tangere into the country. And then when he got his scholarship and went to study in Spain, he was with Rizal in Barcelona and possibly also in London, possibly. But they were close friends. He was a part of La Propaganda. And according to a letter from Mariano Ponce to Rizal, Serrano Laktaw lived in Binondo and he had a school there. The address was Calle Jolo 12. And after the 1888 demonstration, which caused Marcelo H. del Pilar to have to leave the Philippines because he was involved in the organizing, Pedro Serrano was apparently forbidden to continue teaching in his school. And in 1887, he won a scholarship to Spain, and he attended the normal schools of Salamanca and Madrid, the first Filipino student to attend these institutions. And after his postgraduate studies, he became quite well known, so that the queen, wasn't the queen, it was the regent, because the regent was Maria Cristina. She had been widowed. Her husband, King Alfonso the 12th, he died very young, and and so Pedro Serrano was the tutor to the future King Alfonso the 13th. And so in 1889, he moved to Barcelona and he established contacts with Masonic lodges. And they gave him the mission of founding Masonic lodges in the Philippines. And here we see works of Pedro Serrano, Diccionario Hispano-Tagalog. This was the first publication in 1889. Estudios gramaticales sobre la lengua Tagala. He was quite good looking as a young man, and you can see that he was an elegant, well-dressed gentleman, as was Rizal. Oops, how did that happen? Rizal wanted to go over and shake hands with Pedro. Okay, so in August 1888, Rizal wrote to Blumentritt that he had collaborated with Pedro on a new Tagalog orthography, or the way Tagalog was written, the system of writing. And that Rizal discovered that there were parallels with this new orthography with the old Tagalog that he found, the ancient writings that he found in the British Library. And that they considered the large number of Sanskrit words that had been incorporated into Tagalog. And Blumentritt was also friends with Don Pedro and had received proofs of the first edition of the Diccionario. According to the Rizal correspondence, Pedro was a very well-mannered gentleman who avoided all conflict and made many friends everywhere. And later he became quite close to the Jesuits. But Rizal didn't like that very much because he felt that Serrano Laktaw was too condescending and um, too prone to cultivating friendships with everybody, kind of like what we call in Chile, ni chicha ni limonada, neither lemonade nor apple cider, yeah? Or, well, friends that weren't really friends, because Pedro was not prone to being open about his political opinions. But perhaps in the end, it helped him to survive and leave us his wonderful 1914 Serrano Laktaw Dictionary. So he founded the first Masonic Lodge, NILAD, in Manila, and others in other parts of the country. And then he was arrested and went to prison, after which he was pardoned by Governor Blanco. And he decided to renounce Freemasonry and was expelled in 1893. I'm sure this, along with his friendship with the Jesuits, allowed him to escape death during the turbulent years. Although he did write in support of the revolution, and under the Americans, he continued writing nationalistic articles. In internet, they mention Tagalog newspapers. So perhaps he expressed his nationalism much more in Tagalog than in Spanish. And his Diccionario Tagalog-Hispano came out in 1914, and it cemented his reputation. In 1887, he had gotten married to Roberta Buison, and they had 13 children, as I had mentioned. And according to Spanish historian Isaac Donoso, who has studied our history and is continuing to write many books on our literature and on Rizal's works, and he studies the Islamic culture of Mindanao. The Diccionario Serrano Laktaw is a jewel of lexicography whose existence is known by very, very few. To the extent that he asked me if I could make a Spanish version of the previous video that I had shared with you. Now I'd like to tell you how the Diccionario helped me with the verse that ends the wonderful movie, General Luna. At the end of this movie, there is a verse. I don't know where it comes from, but it says, hindi magtatagal para sa pag-ibig sa inang bayan, waring dala ang isang lihim na mensahe. Dinalig tayo ng isang nakakubling kamay at tinapon na parang dahon sa gitna ng sigwa. And I translated it into Spanish and English as best I could, but I couldn't find this word, dinalig. I didn't know what it meant. I mean, it was in none of my, of course, modern dictionaries, and I didn't find it either. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't find it either in the Noseda, but I found something else. I did find clues. But first, I asked Don Guillermo Gomez Rivera what it meant. And I sent him the verse, and he said, dalig no existe. So I looked in my Noseda Sanlúcar 1860 dictionary. It's not this one. This is the original. I just have the cheap version that you can buy on internet, but it's a bargain, although it has quite a few pages that are no longer legible, which is a pity. But dalig is in the Noseda, and it says tabla, mag, and tablar. Magdalig means entablar, to build planks of wood, like for flooring. Yeah. So it says, dalingin mo ang sahig. Put the planks on the floor. And also, daligin mo itong kahoy. Make planks out of this piece of wood. So that didn't fit. They didn't make us into planks of wood, no. But there was an entry for dalin or daling. It said, tie rods together for fencing or bacores. Bacores. And this is part of sleuthing with words, which is that you have to be aware that it could be a typo because the word bacor does not exist. I asked the Royal Academy of Spanish dictionary. I mean, I consulted it, and bacor doesn't exist. So it was probably vapores, vapor. Because you tie, right? Let's go back. It would be, daling would mean to tie several rods together to build fences or for ships, right? Okay, so there we go. And when I got my Diccionario Serrano Laktaw, I looked and I found daling. And here was the solution. Because it says mooring for tying, a floor made of cane wood. And pandaling means ties of bejuco or rattan, prepared for binding a sahig. Yeah, a floor. So dalingin is the verb, to tie, to bind together. Yes, and so that was the solution. And it said, dinaling tayo ng isang nakakubling kamay. We were bound together like sticks by a hidden hand. At tinapon na parang dahon sa gitna ng sigwa. And we were hurled like leaves into the center of the hurricane. The first two lines are, before long, because of love for the motherland, hindi magtatagal para sa pag-ibig sa inang bayan. As though a secret message were carried, waring dala ang isang lihim na mensahe. Dinaling tayo ng isang nakakubling kamay at tinapon na parang dahon sa gitna ng sigwa. And here is a picture of dinaling. This is a room separator in my little cottage, and you can see that's bejuco. It's used to tie together the strips of bamboo, kawayan. Meron ding kawayan sa Chile, pero mas manipis. And in my next video, I will tell you about old Tagalog words preserved by Don Pedro Serrano Laktaw for us, the future generations. Because this dictionary contains riddles and sayings, and also explanations. I mean, the entries are so long, and I will show you how he truly preserves the character, the essence of Tagalog in this dictionary. He talks about, for example, syncopas, in which the D mutates into R. And so you can see, he gives all of these examples. Idikta becomes irikta, idilat, irilat, idilhay, irilhay, idipa, iripa, idlip, I know this word, which is to fall asleep, irlip, to fall into a, to doze, no? Idugtong, irugtong, idukit, irukit, and that comes from ukit, right? He also always indicates the root word. Iduklay, iruklay, iduldol, iruldol, which I do not know what that means. The same as idulog, irulog, idulot, irulot. That's from dulot, I believe. Idoon, iroon, idoong, iroong, iduyan, iruyan, which comes from duyan. And just to give you one example of the richness, there are, for the word tao, which today we say tao, but apparently 100 years ago, they said it more softly, tao. There are 3.5 pages of definitions, meanings, and uses with sample phrases. It begins here, and it continues here. Oops, it moved again, and here, and here. All of these meanings for Tao, which I have not had the time to read through, but I will share with you in my own. Vale? Well, so this is what I have prepared for you today. And let me see. Stop sharing. So, thank you very much for accompanying me again. Maraming salamat sa inyong lahat. At hanggang sa susunod.